Hello everybody, it's Wyvern here with another episode of Fixing the Forgotten, where we discuss the underwhelming, underpowered, or underperforming units, lords, heroes, and regiments of renown of a given faction, and what could be done to improve them, to make them more competitive or more useful. And this does not include cross-faction units, but besides that we will be covering everything, and in this situation we are going to be covering the Wood Elves. And this, in my opinion, is a bit of an interesting faction. Because, to be honest, the Wood Elf unit roster at the moment is rather strong. Most of their units are actually... There are a handful of exceptions. The one glaring one I could think of is Wildwood Rangers. But, by and large, for their cost and given their stats, Wood Elf units are solid. They're not actually that bad. The problem is, Wood Elf have some glaring weaknesses as a faction. And... most significant of those is really just heavy cav. Factions that can swarm with lots of heavy cav are devastating against the Wood Elves. Bretonia, of course, borders on having an auto win, but even factions such as Wood Elves, who can just bring a lot of Silver Helms and Dragon Princes and backed by, say, Shadow Warriors, can do rather well. Even Empire can be very oppressive against Wood Elves if handled competently and brought with a very cav-heavy force, because Wood Elves just don't have many tools to crack that. And so a lot of these changes I'm going to be addressing here, or trying to suggest here, will be more oriented actually to help the Wood Elves deal with this huge issue they have with heavy cav, because it really is a massive issue. Some of the most skewed matchups in the game are because the Wood Elves cannot handle heavy cav. And I do think some of the fixes to that really would be new unit. I really do want or wish the Wood Elves would get new unit types, and perhaps we'll make a note of those in this video. But more importantly, but that said, given that we don't know if we'll ever get new units and all that, I do think that the next best thing is simply buffing their current roster, or changing their current roster a little bit to function a little better in that role. So first and foremost, we do have Orion, and he's actually making the cut here as the only Lord who I think needs some changes. Now, Orion used to be pretty trash, and now he's actually a pretty competitive Lord choice. I don't really have issues with Orion's layout itself. By and large, I think it's decent. I do, however, think some slight tweaks could be made. One, I think he could be a little quicker on his feet. 54 speed is kind of bad for the Lord of the Wild Hunt, especially when he's supposed to synergize with Wild Riders. And apparently on tabletop he was really quick. He was as quick as cavalry, and he's not. That's not the case here. He's only got 54 speed. So I think tweaking his speed up to 60 would be nice. And giving him Vanguard would be really nice, to make him really synergize with those aggressive Vanguard Wood Elf builds. Because right now, on a lot of bigger maps especially, Orion has to start at spawn, and your troops are vanguarded way out. And by the time Orion gets there, 54 speed, not the most impressive thing ever. By the time he's get there, that's 2,000 points worth of gold that's off the field, essentially. And that is definitely very, very harmful and restrictive. So, could come with, say, a plus 50 cost increase or something. I wouldn't necessarily be opposed to that, because I do think Orion is strong in his current state, but I just do think that synergy would be something that could help him, and I would really like to see Orion tweaked in this manner. Another small tweak that could be done, and this would probably have to come with a cost increase or whatever, Hounds of Orion being made into summon rather than a vortex. Currently, they function, obviously, as they're basically the Gehenna's Golden Hounds from the Lore of Metal. They're not terrible per se. I know a lot of people completely hate on his abilities. They're not abysmal in my opinion, especially given that they're very cheap. But I think it would be cool if they got a summon of hounds. Maybe make it like the Norscan Ice Wolves, except without the ice. And that would be nice, just because it would give Wood Elves a little bit of extra backline harass against a faction like, say, Dwarves. And it would give them a little bit of high mass blockage. Like, Wood Elves really struggle right now to try to crowd control cavalry. And obviously this would have to come with cost changes and all that. But I do think that if Orion could, say, summon some hounds, that would give him a little bit more crowd control on the field and make him a little better as a defensive option there, as well as aggressive option to disrupt backlines and that sort of thing. Next up, we do have the Branch Wraith, and this is more of a consistency complaint. The Branch Wraith is the only tree unit that does not have immunity to psychology. Obviously, big tree men, ancient tree men, Druithu all have immunity because they have fear and terror themselves, but both Dryads as well as Treekin, as we can see right here, do have immunity to psychology. And unfortunately, because I chose this map because I felt it was a little thematic, I felt Tamara, but unfortunately, It's a little hard to see, but the Treekin, as you can see, also have immunity psychology. So all other tree units have immunity psychology. For some ungodly reason, the branch rate does not, and it's actually pretty crippling because the branch rate's leadership is abysmal. It's only 60, and that's actually another, in my opinion, somewhat egregious oversight. When Dryads sit at a that's War Dancers, not Dryads. When Dryads sit at 65, and Treekin sit at 70 baseline. So personally, I think I would like to see if the branch rate got its leadership buffed to at least 65, perhaps 70. Honestly, a lot of times you'll have like a box with Durthu and the Treeman, and the branch just routes like a complete pansy very, very quickly because leadership is just so bad and you don't have immunity psychology. So I really do think give it immunity psychology and boost its leadership to like 65. It doesn't have to be anything crazy, but make it a little sturdier at sticking around, because it's really frustrating when this unit just routes so very easily, and honestly feels a little bit ridiculous when it comes down to it. I don't really have, as far as the rest of the lords and heroes in the Wood Elf roster, I don't really have any complaints or points to raise. I think obviously the Glady is insanely good. Both the Treeman and Durthu and the Glade Lord, the male Glade Lord, are very solid picks in their own right. The Waystalker can be downright abusive against some factions, and it's a very potent choice. And the Spellslinger is powerful. I would like to see more lores because once again, I do think there's other options like to give the Wood Elf more things to help with some of their bad matchups. But while I would like to see new Spellslinger types, or spellcaster lord options or that sort of thing, honestly, the Spellslingers are fine as a unit themselves, so there's not much to complain about there. And that does bring us on to infantry, and this might be a bit of a quick one as well. Honestly, Wood Elf infantry is, for their cost, keep in mind, this is, so oftentimes the Wood Elves do struggle in the sense that their units are a bit, they're very pricey, well, not a bit, they are very pricey. Their cheapest quote-unquote chaff is 475 for unshielded spears. Now granted, those spears have AP and 80 leadership, which, you know, that's great, but it's 475 gold for a unit that has no shields. Very low HP, only 40 armor, and just dies. And to get shields, your next cheapest unit is 550 gold at the Dryads and Eternal Guard. So I do think there are some issues with the Wood Elf roster there. And first and foremost, on the topic of Dryads, I think they could use a slight tweak in tankiness still. Either improve their melee defense a tiny bit so they can survive a little better, or make them have a little bit more HP. Nothing crazy, but like 2 to 4 HP per model I think could be nice. They are very flimsy. Despite the 60 armor, 5200 HP is pitiful. They're a 550 gold unit, and honestly a lot of their stats are not great. They've only got 5 AP, which is worse than, say, Empire Swordsman. It's actually a pretty terrible AP value. There aren't many units with worse, especially not in like serious infantry, obviously ignoring chaff like peasants and Skaven slaves. 24 melee defense is terrible. 33 melee. Essentially all their defense, all their survivability is wrapped up in physical resist and kind of armor, but they don't have that much armor. Even with the physical resist, you're looking at like 6,000 or 7 or so effective HP. It's really not that crazy. Like 6,500 effective. So I think a tiny bit more HP could be useful. Once again, keep in mind it does get tweaked as well by that physical resist, because the more HP you got to burn through with physical resist, the tougher it is. But I do think, say, 5,400 or so HP could be reasonable for the Dryads, and not push them into an OP territory. Otherwise, like +1 or 2 melee defense could also help them just that little bit at performing. And there are other sort of rework options I've seen, because apparently the Dryads could take various forms in tabletop, and so sort of form that would make them, or either having a new unit or a new form, or like a war dance type thing that could make them tankier for a little bit, or make them do more damage or have AP for a little bit, but in exchange for other stats. But barring such major reworks, I do think it's just making them a little tankier would help. Which does get us on to the only other, well, actually no, I should touch War Dancers. So War Dancers, Azrael Spears, AI stupid and is casting Woven Mist here. So their melee defense is actually not a pitiful 22. They're not a halberd unit, 22 melee defense. But War Dancers, Azrael Spears, stat-wise are not a terrible unit. The big problem is their HP is very, very bad, 5,100. I just mentioned how Dryads struggle with low HP. These guys are even worse. They've got 2 less HP per model. They've got no armor. 15 is basically no armor. 20% physical resist, and that's literally it. That's their only, that and melee defense is their only survivability. Now their AP value is pretty solid, 20 AP. 23 bonus for large is pretty good. It's easily within the elite rank, like within the ranks of elite halberd units. I do believe like Blackheart, for example, is 24 off the top of my head. So these guys are definitely up there in bonus for large. The problem is they actually don't really do their job of defending against large all that well. They're too slow to catch it, much like Slayers, for example, and they tend to get bowled over and just run over. And I actually saw a cool recommendation made to either add a dance or change Woven Mist to make them immune to knockdown or knockback for a short period of time. So that way, as you're either countercharging or intercepting the enemy cav, or simply trying to block them or whatever, zone them away, rather than simply getting bowled over and then the enemy rushes a unit of Grail Knights or whatever to your backline, the War Dancers actually prevent the charge. They actually stay on their feet and they're able to keep dishing out damage. And I think this would be a really cool mechanic. It would really help the War Dancers actually do their job as a backline defender and anti-large hunter without breaking the faction or making them too OP or overtuned. Besides that, I actually don't think the unit is that, for the cost, I think the unit is very, very solid, but I do think that right now they're just not able to perform their task. Much like Slayer's kind of struggling. You actually don't see Slayers all that often either. But Slayers, I think, do have a bit more versatility than War Dancers with Azrai Spears, and they do have a bit more tankiness. They've got shields, that sort of thing. I guess Slayers don't have the physical resist, but still, the War Dancers, definitely, in my opinion, that knockback immunity, I think, would be a really cool way of making them better against cap. Just a temporary thing where they have a burst of immunity. Next up, the next normal unit, Wildwood Rangers. This unit honestly sucks, and I don't think that's an overstatement. In raw stats, they look amazing. 48 melee attack, 38 melee defense. Sure, their armor's not great, but 36 speed for a great weapon unit. Very solid in competition with everything except like up to Bestigors and Sensor Bearers. AP damage is 32. That's pretty crazy. That's more than Great Swords with their bonus versus infantry thrown in. Charge bonus of 22 is actually not bad for a great weapon unit, and they've got this cool ability, Guardians of the Wildwood. Immunity Psychology, pretty good. They only cost 1,000 gold. The problem is they're basically useless on the Wood Elf roster. The unit they're really supposed to specialize against is great weapons and halberds. You're never going to see those units as the Wood Elves. Ever, basically. Because Way Watchers. That's like all there is to say, really. They're Way Watchers. And even if Way Watchers got nerfed, and I think I have seen some good recommendations, if Wood Elves got buffs, Way Watchers could get some nerfs. But even if that happens, the simple fact is no sane player is really going to bring elite unshielded infantry into the Wood Elves. The other problem is that Wild Rangers honestly don't even trade that well into that elite infantry, even in a vacuum. Like Flak Orcs will still bludgeon their way through you. Even Sensor Bearers bludgeon their way through Wildwood Rangers. If I remember correctly, these guys actually do outtrade Vestigors, but most infantry will overrun Wildwood Rangers. I think they beat Harganeth Executioners, but most stuff does because Harganeth Executioners don't get their trait proccing, Murder's Mastery. But yeah, by and large, these guys just don't do great. And yeah, the units they should be good against just don't show up when you're playing as Wood Elves. They certainly don't show up in the quantity to justify bringing these guys over, so just using Way Watchers. And the units you do struggle against, these guys just don't. So they're not actually great against sword and board infantry because their melee attack is not high enough. It's not like Swordmasters who will dice through shielded infantry quickly because they've just got that insane bonus versus infantry and they're super specialized. Wild Rangers aren't like that. They've got 48 melee attack, which is very high and very good, don't get me wrong. But ultimately, given that they've only got 40 armor, they're not going to trade amazingly well into a unit like, say, Chosen, or a unit like, I'm trying to think what other sword and board Ironbreakers will decimate you. That's not even a contest, even if without the blasting charges. So Wild Rangers kind of struggle there. They're not really able to hit up, and now they are very powerful in Woodland because of their Factier Guardians of the Wildwood, but that's kind of it. They're the one matchup where you will often see them is as a desperation pick against dwarves, just because they do bring AP. They're a great weapon unit, but dwarves obviously tend to decimate them. They're very easy to focus down, no armor, low HP, relatively speaking, at 6,300. That's Empire State Troop levels. It's high for an elf, but that's it. It's high for an elf. It's definitely not a great HP pool. Very susceptible to cavalry charges, and of course Heavy Cav already loves to feast on Wood Elf souls, so it just makes it worse. So what could be done to improve Wild Rangers? What could be done to fix them? Now, in my opinion, the one thing that would truly make them viable would be to make them Haggard Swordmaster, like a sword, essentially a unit that has a huge bonus versus infantry, and is maybe stripped down the melee defense, but is designed to kill these shielded, designed to kill shielded infantry, essentially, because that is one of the bigger weaknesses. I guess not big, but one of the bigger weaknesses on the Wood Elf roster, and it's one of the reasons they're really struggling against the dwarves, because they don't have a great way of cracking shielded infantry. And I think giving Wildwood Rangers a huge bonus for infantry would be a fix. Now the problem is, I don't think this is one. It's not very thematic, and the fact that they've already shifted more to a great weapon rather than an anti-large unit is already not very thematic. So I don't think CA is going to do that, even though that is probably would be necessary to really make these guys a useful pick. So barring that, I have seen suggestions to give these guys Vanguard, which would help them in rush situations against, say, dwarves. Otherwise, I've also seen recommendations to give these guys Stalk, though I think that would have to come perhaps with a slight cost increase. That was like plus 50. Some sort of missile resist is also something I've seen recommended, just to make them a little sturdier on the way in. I do think that could be cool. Another option, perhaps because these guys are like the defenders of the Wildwood Rangers defend the Wildwood in Cithrall, which is actually represented by the Wardens of Cithrall. But these guys are supposed to defend against like the big nasties, and they're like the wardens of the rest of Athaloran from all the horrors that are in the dark parts of the woods. And I feel like they could be given some sort of mechanic where the less HP they have, the better they fight, or the more damage they're doing, sort of like the Slayers of Deathblow. And I feel like with their high leadership, they could often get you value out of this. And it would mean that if your opponent focuses you very hard, you can still get value out of these guys. Like some mechanic where it wouldn't necessarily have to be a huge boost stats, but something where they're gaining like I don't know. It could be like different tiers. You could have like 50% HP. They're doing plus, I don't know, 10% melee. It could be like plus 4 melee attack and plus 10% weapon strength or something. And then if they're below 25%, it could be like plus 20% and plus like 6 melee attack or something. Something that represents the fact that they are like the last line of defense, or like the main line of defense against like all the horrors, and like they know it and they're defending their homes. And I guess they're not the last line of defense, but they're like the only line of defense, kind of. And I really feel like that could be flavorful and give them a little bit more viability. Right now, I don't, like I said, I think the main fix would be to make them anti-infantry specialists, but like I said, I don't think it's going to happen. Or anti-shielded infantry specialists, to be more accurate. Debuff the melee defense so they're more vulnerable to great weapons, and buff give them a big bonus versus infantry, and that would probably be a good buff. The other problem is they're just so strong in woods, and obviously any buff that comes in, you have to be wary of the fact that you don't want these guys overpowered in woodland. They already border on that. But I have seen some recommended reworks, and perhaps that's content for a different video about how Wildwood Rangers, how the Wood Elf Forest Stalker trait, or the Forest Stalker trait in general, should be reworked, because right now it's a bit of a troubling mechanic just because it buffs combat stats quite a bit, and it often just skews a faction in certain situations, and it makes it difficult to properly balance units. Next up, we do have the Regiments of Renown. So first and foremost, Wardens of Cithrall. I think these guys simply need... Honestly, went up in price last patch. I'm not sure why. The unit is good, but the reason they're so popular is because they just synergize well. They're not like, stat-wise, they're not insanely overpowered or something. They just synergize well with Wood Elf strategies or Vanguard strats, because they do have... well, they're like super Eternal Guard that Vanguards, and that's all there's to say, really. They're uber Eternal Guard that can Vanguard. They got AP, they got bonus for large, they got good melee defense, decent melee attack. The Armor Sunring is just like a little bonus on the top of the cake. They can synergize with Drides a little bit, but I don't think they deserve that. I believe it was a 50 gold increase last patch. I'd say revert that. I just don't see it. They're a bit of a side grade from normal Wild Rangers. I just don't believe they deserve their current cost. Finally, we do have the Regiment of Renown Lurks Tricksters. I think these guys could use another downward tweak. I thought the previous buff was actually kind of unwarranted, but honestly, I do think that, simply put, their cost is very, very prohibitive. And one, if there was an additional dance granted to the War Dancers, obviously I think these guys should get it as well, just to be immune to knockback and for a little bit and able to resist cavalry. Otherwise, I think they are, yeah, in a pretty. I think they're they could just use a slight downward cost tweak by another, say, 50. I don't think they're an abysmal unit or something, but I do think they're just a bit pricey at the moment for the performance they deliver. I'm trying to think if there's anything else to really be said for them, but no, I think that's really it. I do think they're a pretty cool unit right now, and have some cool potential, especially with Loic Shroud, to do some wondrous stuff. Next up, we do have the shooting infantry and the skirmishers, and I actually have all three Delayed Guard lined up. My first recommendation is buff these guys range to 180, so they match High Elf archers. There's not much to say there. I just don't understand why the Glade Guard, who are like supposed to be basically the best vanilla archers in the game, get outranged by High Elf militia archers. It's kind of odd. I think 180 range would be fair and wouldn't really break these guys. Let's be honest, Glade Guard are already not that popular with pick, just because they, with Wood Elves, you're either doing a tree box or a sort of scattered, spread out skirmish build, and Glade Guard don't synergize well with either of those really. But I do think giving them 10 more range will be nice and all. And second of all, I think Starfire Shafts should be given back magic damage. The simple fact is that it didn't help the dwarf matchup. The fact that these guys had their fire damage replaced with, or is that they had their damage simply made normal physical. It has like, I know that was one of the rationales given way back when, was that these guys should lose the magic so they can be better against dwarves. Honestly, I think that should be fixed by taking away dwarfs' magic resistance and separating magic and spell damage. It's a whole other story though. Blade Guard with Starfire Shout. So right now the fact is, if they had magic damage, they could be a little more competitive against say Bretonnia, give you a little bit more staying power against some of those physically resistant units. And I just think that would be a nice way to help them out at least a little bit. Maybe not a lot, but at least give them something. And yes, but I do believe it would just help in certain situations. Bretonnia is especially one of them, where it's a bit of a sore point. And obviously these guys are still very difficult to use against Bretonnia, but maybe it could help at least a little bit. Next up, Deepwood Scouts with Sift Shivers. A while back, these guys got a nerf to range from 140 to 135. I think that should be reverted. Honestly, these guys are kind of rare to begin with, and the nerf to their range, in my opinion, was unwarranted. It makes them, like, they already do struggle really to net value sometimes. They're already outranged by the vast majority, or either matched or outranged by the vast majority of enemy skirmishers. So I think that buffing them up a tiny bit, 140 would not really break anything. It wouldn't be the end of the world. Unfortunately, I did forget them here, but the Hawkeyes of Drakira, and these might be a little bit of a sore point here, but the Regiment of Renown Way Watchers, and I actually forgot to bring them in here. But I think they could use a slight tweak to their either cost or their exact kit. The fact of the matter is that the smoke bomb just isn't really that useful on them. Usually, if your opponent dives you with a heavy cav or even a light skirmisher, it's not enough to save your troops, because they're already on top of you by the time the smoke bomb goes off. It's not like Nasty Skulkers, where it's a unit that's in between your archers and your main line, or your firing line. It's literally is your firing line. So it's just like if Goblin Archers had a smoke bomb, you wouldn't really care about it that much. And it kind of matters even less with the Wood Elves, because you've got much fewer archers and they're much more elite, so they're usually getting shut down hard anyway. And or I should say they're much more expensive, and so they cost more, and you've only got like say 2 or 3 Way Watchers. Maybe if it's a super abusive build, you've got like 4, but a lot of times your opponent is much more capable of shutting those down. He's got units on top of them because your defense isn't that good, and the smoke bomb just doesn't save you. It doesn't make a difference really. So I honestly much rather just see the Hawkeyes of Drakira loot, either have their hawkish precision. Well, there's a few ways you could do it. I could see them getting snipe. I could, in exchange for smoke bomb, make their hawkish precision a better version, like the old one, or just remove the smoke bomb and drop their cost by like 100. Because right now I just don't think the unit is just overpriced essentially for an item that doesn't generate much value, in my opinion. And if you guys don't agree, be sure to let me know. I actually use Hawkeyes of Drakira somewhat often myself, but I definitely do feel the pinch with that cost, because ultimately you're basically just paying for the discouraged effect. And that smoke bomb, I can't really think of an instance where the smoke bomb has really helped me win a game or swing a game. And it's always about the discouraged. And don't get me wrong, the discouraged effect is great, but smoke bomb, it's meh. So whatever. Which does get us on to cavalry, and honestly, the Wood Elf Cav is good for the cost, by and large. So don't get me wrong there. I don't think the Wood Elf Cav is necessarily bad, but the other thing that they do need some new options here. I would like to see a melee Glade Rider introduced, so they have a cheap light cav in like the 600 range. Wild Riders, the unshielded variant, in my opinion, could be reworked to be a little more offensive. Now, I know this is a similar point could be made for other unshielded units, but specifically in the case of the Wood Elves, because of their struggles with enemy heavy cav, I think Wild Riders without shields could be given, obviously with a hike in cost, bringing up to like 1200 like the normal Wild Riders, but I think they could be given a slightly higher AP ratio, bump them up to, say, even if they lose some non-AP, but give them to say up to, say, like, I don't know, 27 and 18 or something, so they've got a little more AP damage, so they can do a little more against heavy cav. I think that could be good. Giving them a slightly higher melee attack so they can grind out a little bit better, just making their offensive stats a little bit better. Or giving them like +2 AP, +2 non-AP damage or something. Just giving them something to give them a little more oomph. The main problem is for the Wood Elves is heavy cav, and they don't really have the tools to handle it. And this would be a bit of a haggard fix, but it would at least give them a little more staying power against heavy cav. Not something to sort of swing the tide in their favor necessarily, but at least give them a fighting chance. And I do think that making the Wild Riders without shields a little punchier would be nice. Obviously, you can extend this argument to Eternal Guard without shields, to Empire Spearmen without shields, Silver Helms without shields, yada yada. There's a bunch of other examples of units like this, but I really wanted to bring up this example specifically of the Wild Riders because I feel like this is really the unit where the Wood Elves could get a big benefit if they were reworked this way. And next up, we do have the Wild Hunters of Kurnus, the Regiment of Renown. And here, it's a bit of an issue in the sense that Guardian, it doesn't synergize with Orion really at all. You only really bring them as an uber elite Wild Rider, or sometimes synergize with a Glade Lord on a Dragon, and that can be a little abusive because these guys do have, you get that extra 15% physical resist on top of the existing 20% physical resist on a Glade Lord. Makes them borderline invincible to missiles. And because you end up with like 50, oh no, because you've got scaly skin, so you end up with like 65% missile resistance against physical projectiles, and or sorry, 60% missile resistance to physical missiles, but and 35% resistance to physical attacks. But I could see the Wild Hunters of Kurnus. One of the recommendations I've seen to rework these guys a bit, they've got like specific function, is giving them AP. There's been arguments to give them armor sundering as well, but I do believe that could have issues where they synergize a bit too well. Then you'd have a blob of Wild Riders that can just hammer someone in his face in. You suddenly armor sunder with the Wild Hunters, and now you got like 2 or 3 Wild Riders pounding someone's face in, and that's it. But giving the Wild Hunters AP, in my opinion, would give that Wood Elves a little more punch against those cavalry blobs they really struggle against. And obviously this would have to come at the cost of Guardian, otherwise with a price hike. Like we're talking a major price hike, probably like 150, 200 gold, but just probably swapping their AP ratios, but or AP non-AP ratios, and obviously, like I said, that would come with a big price hike. At that point, it's like Maws of Savagery essentially who get that swap as well. But I do believe that could be otherwise, obviously removing Guardian for that, and maybe with a slight price hike like +50, but I do think that would make these guys have a little more of a unique function in the roster and actually help fix a Wood Elf issue. And finally, we do have the Hawk Riders. And Hawk Riders, in my opinion, are actually not bad. First and foremost, though, as you guys have probably seen, I've used them a lot in my replays and really enjoy using the unit in aerial goon squads. But my main critique here is that the fact that they've got a bugged shooting animation, they don't shoot oftentimes after stopping. It's just an error, and that's something I would like to see fixed. That's a bug, but it would be nice to see that fixed. Second of all, and this would be more of aiming towards rework. Now, personally, once again, that's a suggestion I've seen to make an alternate variant of Hawk Riders with a spear, making an anti-large AP variant, and that is personally what I would prefer to this. But given that I don't know what our odds of getting new units are, even if it would just be a slight reskin or slight remodel, I guess, of a unit, kit bash essentially. I have seen suggestions to boost Hawk Rider's combat prowess so that they could be a more viable AP option. Because right now, they can isolate a specific unit and beat it down pretty well, because while their stats are pretty terrible, they do have a decent charge bonus of 42 and 45 AP weapon strength, which is, not bad. It's 34 AP damage. With splash, by the way, they do have, I believe, 4 model splash radius, so they can do a lot of damage on the charge. But against a faction like Bretonnia or Empire or factions like that, it's just not enough a lot of the time. Unless your opponent really messes up and lets his units get isolated one by one and doesn't move in to support them quickly at all, which you're really counting on your opponent screwing up. Hawk Riders just can't sustain in combat. Their HP is terrible, as you can see, 3420, no physical resist, no armor, no melee defense. They basically have no combat redeeming values outside of that very high weapon strength and charge bonus. So I think that if they were to be tweaked to be a little fightier, obviously this would have to come at a cost increase once again. I think they could be given, say, another +5 melee attack and another, say, 5 melee defense, and then maybe honestly something like 600 HP or so. Make them a more competitive combat choice. Basically, that's food for thought. Something that could potentially make these guys a little better in combat and at supporting with, once again, those heavy armored threats. But besides that, just give these guys their damn bug fix. And that's really, I guess we could. Okay, so the one more thing, I suppose, Treekin. And this is something I'm a little iffy because they have gotten some of these changes already. But I think they could still use a slight tweak upward in offensive stats. I know they're supposed to be the holding option, and it shows in their stats. But I think the fact is they still hit like wet noodles, and it makes them a bit difficult to justify. Sometimes you'll bring the Firebark Elders as your sole anchor unit, like alongside Treemen or whatever, or Dirthu and company. But I think these guys could use like another +3 or so weapon strength. And maybe at like the cost of 1 melee defense or 2 melee defense, some slight adjustments there. Just make the Treekin a little more heavy hitting. The fact is 58 weapon strength, especially with splash involved, is just not very good at all. And really restricts these guys' usefulness against in damage. And when you're paying 900 unit, the thing is, you're paying 900 gold for what's essentially a roadblock. And sure, these guys are better than a roadblock like Empire Spears or something, but ultimately you only get 1 Treekin. It costs you 900 gold. In comparison, a faction like Dwarves can get 3 Miners almost for that price, and they essentially serve the same function of just being a speed bump. And they can cover 3 areas at once, or be a reserve, or whatever. And sure, Treekin will resist longer than Empire Spears or Dwarf Miners, but ultimately Treekin, that staying power doesn't matter when they can't cover enough ground and they don't actually kill units. They're not a threat. Your opponent can literally just bog these guys down with some absolute garbage. Like, they'll take forever to cleave, even through, say, Chaos Marauders. And in the meantime, your opponent's swarming you because they've gotten this cost-efficient trade of like 300 gold unit into your 900 gold unit. Your 900 gold unit is, it'll win decisively after like a year of fighting, but that doesn't really matter because by then your opponent's won the rest of the battle. So I just think these guys could use a slight upward tweak in weapon strength. Regardless, that is my take on the Wood Elves. I do think the faction, honestly, the biggest fixes it needs are ones that are not necessarily resolvable by buffs to their units. I think they need new units and perhaps new lords and perhaps new magic lore options to really help them in some of those most brutal matchups. But I do think that there are a few suggestions and tweaks that could make them just a little bit more competitive, help them just that little bit more against factions like Bretonnia and Empire to a lesser extent, but Bretonnia and especially High Elves a little bit, maybe help them against Dwarves as well. By buffing those Wild Rangers, for example. Just giving them a little bit more potential there. But regardless, I do hope you guys enjoyed the video. If you found it entertaining and, well, thought-provoking perhaps. If you have your own comments, your own input, if you think that some of these buffs are just unnecessary, or reworks are just unnecessary, or if you have your own opinions on units I might have missed, you should let me know. I'd love to see what you guys come up with. Some of you guys have, I've seen some really great ideas, and some of you guys have very different takes on things or use units in very different ways than I do. And sometimes there's just something I miss or just don't use properly, and it's always interesting to see everyone's input. Obviously, I didn't cover units that are cross-faction, so Eagles didn't make the cut here. They will be made in a future video covering cross-faction units, but regardless, hope you guys enjoyed. Hope you found it entertaining and fun, and leave your comments, critiques, and input down below. As I said, I love to read it, love to hear it, and I will see you all in the next one. Bye for now.